The hum of rolling suitcases, distant boarding calls, and hurried footsteps filled Terminal C of the New York airport. Amid the noise, a quiet, trembling sob stood out, fragile and out of place. Officer Rebecca Sullivan, in full K-9 uniform, turned instinctively. Her German Shepherd partner, Max, stopped too, ears up, eyes locked. Near gate C-14, a little boy sat alone, head down, tears dripping onto his lap. Before Rebecca could react, Max pulled the leash from her hand and bolted. Gasps erupted from travelers as the dog sprinted across the terminal. Some froze, expecting danger. Others stepped aside, unsure what was happening. But Max didn't attack, bark, or search. He slid to a stop right in front of the boy, sat down, and gently nudged his nose against the child's arm, like he recognized him. Rebecca ran after him, heart pounding, her boots hitting the tile hard. "Max, what the hell are you doing?" she said, breathless, kneeling beside them. But Max stayed calm. Still, his eyes never left the boy's face. The child slowly looked up, cheeks streaked with tears. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Hunter." The name stopped Rebecca cold. Max's previous name, before he was reassigned, had been Hunter. That name had been retired when his former handler, Sergeant Brian Whitaker, died in a house fire 3 years ago, along with his wife and son. There had been no survivors. At least that's what they had been told. "Sweetheart," she said softly. "What's your name?" "Danny," the boy whispered, holding onto Max's neck like a life raft. Danny Whitaker. Rebecca felt her stomach drop. She had read that name before in an old case file. Danny Whitaker had been presumed dead, officially, but here he was, alive, alone, and clinging to a dog he hadn't seen in years. Around them, the airport went eerily silent, as if everyone understood something deep was unfolding. Rebecca pulled out her radio, her hand trembling. "Dispatch, this is Officer Sullivan. I need you to reopen case number 1837, W. Whitaker family fire. Get missing persons on the line. I think we've found someone." Max remained next to the boy, motionless and alert. The reunion felt more than coincidental. Something was wrong. And then Danny looked up again and asked, voice shaking, "Why didn't anybody come for me?" Rebecca paced inside the airport's small security office, her eyes locked on the boy who sat quietly on the bench, still holding Max's collar like a lifeline. He hadn't spoken much since he said his name, Danny Whitaker, but his presence had already set off a chain reaction that Rebecca couldn't stop now. The fire, the old case, the fact that Max, Hunter, had recognized him immediately. None of it made sense, unless everything they'd believed about that fire was wrong. She turned to the screen, where the dispatch officer had pulled up the old Whitaker file. Grainy photos, a burned-out house, the official report. Brian Whitaker, deceased. Wife, deceased. Child Danny, presumed dead. No remains found. Only assumptions. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. How had that passed as a closed case? She scanned the file again, slower this time. Something didn't feel right. The house had burned fast, but it hadn't been ruled arson. Just faulty wiring. No investigation into missing persons. Just closure. Outside the office window, Max sat faithfully by Danny's side. Every time someone tried to approach, he stiffened. Not aggressive, just defensive. Protective. As if he'd gone right back into his old role without hesitation. Rebecca had trained with Max for 2 years now, and not once had she seen him behave like this. Whatever connected him and Danny, it was real and deep. A soft knock at the door pulled her attention back. Linda Parker, a social services liaison, stepped in quietly, clipboard in hand. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held concern. "We ran his fingerprints. No match in any child ID system. But there's something else," she said. "His backpack. Inside was a photograph burned around the edges. Him, his parents, and the dog. Same collar Max wears now. Same eyes. It's him, Rebecca." Rebecca leaned against the wall, her breath caught in her chest. Then where has he been all this time? And who let the world believe he died? The question wasn't just procedural, it was personal now. Danny had slipped through the cracks. Or worse, someone had hidden him. And if that was true, it meant someone didn't want him found. Danny looked up from the bench at that moment. His voice was low, steady, almost rehearsed. He told me not to talk, that people would come take me away if I did. Rebecca stepped forward. Who told you that, Danny? But the boy only shook his head. Silent, scared, like someone was still watching. The photograph from Danny's backpack sat on the desk like a forgotten relic from another life. Rebecca stared at it, heart pounding. It was faded, partly scorched on the edges, but the image was clear enough. A younger Danny stood between a tall man in uniform, Sergeant Brian Whitaker, and a woman with long dark hair, laughing. And beside them, Max, or rather, Hunter. The photo had been taken before the fire, before the lies. Linda leaned over, frowning. The woman, his mother, right? Rebecca nodded slowly, but something about the woman's face tugged at her memory. She'd seen that expression before, that crooked smile. She looks familiar, Rebecca murmured, almost to herself. I think I've seen her, not in the file, in person. The idea chilled her. If the mother had died in the fire, how could Rebecca recognize her? The office door opened abruptly. Agent Charles Donovan from the FBI walked in, tall, gray-haired, and carrying the weight of too many unfinished cases. He gave a quick glance to Danny, who sat curled near Max on the bench. Then he turned to Rebecca. I read the file. It's thin, too thin. We marked this as a fatal fire with no forensic follow-up. No confirmed remains. That's not how we handle family cases. Someone pushed this under the rug. Rebecca handed him the photo. Look at her. The wife, Elaine Whitaker. Do you recognize her? Donovan narrowed his eyes at the image. I'll be honest. A few years ago, a woman matching that face was spotted at a shelter in Pennsylvania. She called herself Anna Layton. Disappeared before we could track her. We never made the connection. Maybe we should have. The pieces were starting to move. If Elaine hadn't died in the fire, that meant someone had faked her death, and maybe Brian's too. Or maybe only one of them had planned the escape. Rebecca's stomach twisted. Do you think she's alive? Hiding? Donovan exhaled. If she is, she's running from something. And if Danny was kept hidden, someone didn't want him found. That means this wasn't just about survival. It was intentional. Rebecca glanced at Danny again. He was staring at the floor, tracing the pattern of the tile with his finger. Detached, distant. She walked over and knelt beside him. Danny, can I ask you one more thing? He didn't answer, but she continued gently. Do you remember your mom? Do you remember where she went? Danny finally looked up. His eyes were clear but heavy. She told me to stay in the closet. She said the fire was coming. But it wasn't real fire. It was to make people stop looking. Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was missing from this puzzle. Danny's words echoed in her mind. It wasn't real fire. It was to make people stop looking. Fires don't start themselves. And if this one had been staged, someone had gone to extreme lengths to erase a family. But why? What was the Whitaker family running from? Agent Donovan had already placed calls to reopen archived records. Meanwhile, Rebecca reviewed surveillance footage from the airport's last 12 hours, hoping to find a clue, any clue, as to how Danny ended up here alone. And then, at 5:42 a.m., there it was. A grainy black and white clip. A large black pickup truck slowing down just outside the departure's curb. The rear door opened. Danny climbed out alone, clutching his backpack. The truck drove away without hesitation. Rebecca froze the frame. The truck had no plates. The driver never got out. And Danny? He didn't look scared. He looked trained, like he had been told exactly what to do and where to go. She leaned back in her chair. Someone brought him here on purpose, she said aloud. But why now? Donovan entered with a file in hand. We got a lead. The name Anna Layton, Was used to check into a motel in Harrisburg 2 months ago. Paid in cash. Left the next morning. No trace since. He tossed the file on the desk. The motel clerk remembered her because she was traveling with a man. Not her husband. Mid-50s. Ex-military type. Wore a baseball cap low over his eyes. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. You think it was the guy in the truck? Donovan nodded. Could be. We're running traffic cam footage from that day. But if he's smart, he'll stay invisible. Rebecca stood, pacing again. So the question is, who staged the fire, took Danny, and kept him hidden for 3 years, only to suddenly drop him off at an airport? Outside the office, Max remained glued to Danny's side, his protective stance unshaken. Danny hadn't spoken much since the last interview. But now, as Rebecca approached him again, he whispered something barely audible. His name was Mr. Richard. He said not to tell. Rebecca leaned in. Richard? Do you remember anything else about him? Danny looked up. He had pictures. Of me. Of my mom. He said she didn't want me anymore. But I don't believe him. Rebecca's chest tightened. Mr. Richard. Whoever he wasn't just a driver. He was part of whatever had torn this family apart. And now, the chase wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about finding this man before he disappeared again. The name Mr. Richard struck a nerve. It was too specific, too deliberate. Rebecca sat at her desk long after the airport emptied out for the night, her eyes fixed on the reports spread in front of her. She was no longer dealing with a cold case. This was alive, present. And the man Danny called Mr. Richard was a missing link between what happened in that fire and why the boy had surfaced now. Agent Donovan returned with a thin, wrinkled file in his hand. You're not going to believe this, he said, sliding it across the desk. Brian Whitaker's next-door neighbor back then? Richard Hale. Army vet. Lived 2 doors down. Moved out the week after the fire. Never left a forwarding address. He paused. And get this, he volunteered as a mentor to troubled kids in the county. No criminal record, but there are gaps. Rebecca opened the file. The man in the photo was older now, but unmistakable. Square jaw, high cheekbones, eyes too cold for someone who claimed to help children. She remembered something Danny had said. He had pictures. Of me. Of my mom. She shivered. This guy didn't just take Danny, she muttered. He planned it. He watched them. Outside, Danny was asleep in a cot in the break room. Max curled protectively at his feet. Rebecca walked over, quietly watching the boy breathe. The innocence on his face was jarring when she thought of what he'd survived. Fire, loss, lies, and now possibly manipulation by a man who lived just a few feet from his family. What had Richard Hale been doing all these years? And more importantly, who else knew? Rebecca's phone buzzed. A message from a contact in local law enforcement. Possible sighting of Richard Hale near Ridge Hollow. Driving an old maroon Chevy. No tags. Ridge Hollow was a ghost town. Abandoned buildings, empty farmland. A perfect place to disappear. Or hide something. She turned to Donovan. We need to go. Tonight. He raised an eyebrow. You sure? That place is barely lit and outside jurisdiction. I don't care, she said firmly. He dropped Danny off for a reason. Maybe he's done with him. Or maybe he's cleaning up. As they loaded into the vehicle, Max leapt into the back seat without being called. His eyes locked forward, unblinking. The air felt heavier now. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel. Somewhere out there, a man who knew too much was waiting in the dark. And he might be the only one who could reveal what really happened the night the Whitaker house burned. Ridge Hollow wasn't on most maps anymore. The road into town was cracked and half swallowed by weeds, bordered by leafless trees and abandoned barns. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel as her headlights cut through the thick mist. Beside her, Donovan scrolled through the last known property records. He owns nothing in his name, but there's a deed under an old alias, Caleb Rickman. A shack near the woods. No neighbors for miles. Max stirred in the back seat, ears twitching. Rebecca had learned to trust his instincts. The dog had barely moved during the drive until now. He sat up, alert. "We're close," she whispered. They turned off the main road onto a dirt path barely wide enough for their SUV. The trees thickened, and the fog seemed heavier here, like the forest didn't want to let go of its secrets. The cabin came into view, just barely visible under the moonlight. Weathered wood, boarded windows, a rusted truck out front. No lights, no movement. Rebecca parked 100 feet away. "We go quiet," she said. Donovan nodded, hand already on his holster. They stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. Max padded silently beside them, nose to the air. Rebecca approached the front door, flashlight off, relying on instinct and the low growl building in Max's throat. She touched the door, it was ajar. A single push and it creaked open, revealing the musty darkness inside. The air smelled of mildew, old coffee, and something else, chemical, sharp. Donovan whispered, "Basement." She nodded. There was always a basement. They swept the main room, maps on the walls, newspaper clippings, photos of the Whitaker family. And Danny, hundreds of them, some from years ago, some recent. One in particular chilled her. Danny at the airport curb just before he was dropped off. He was watching him. "Even now," she muttered. Donovan spotted a trapdoor in the corner, slightly open. From below, a dim red light flickered. Rebecca knelt, flashlight in hand, and slowly opened it the rest of the way. A narrow wooden staircase descended into silence. She looked at Max. He stood completely still, then suddenly took a step back, growling deep in his throat. "Something's down there," she whispered. And then, a voice echoed from below, calm and strange. He wasn't supposed to remember, but he always does. That's the problem with smart kids. Rebecca's blood turned cold. Richard Hale was down there, and from the sound of it, he knew they were here, and he had been expecting them. The stairwell creaked with every step as Rebecca descended, flashlight in one hand, her other resting near her weapon. Max remained at the top, pacing anxiously, letting out low, uneasy whimpers. Donovan followed close behind, his voice a low whisper. "We're walking into something bad." Rebecca already knew. The energy in the basement was thick, like the air itself had been holding its breath for years. The basement was small, lined with concrete walls and a single hanging bulb casting a reddish glow. In the corner stood a tall man, graying hair, denim jacket, steel in his eyes. Richard Hale. His hands were up, not in surrender, but in calculated calm. "Did the boy talk?" he asked, tone flat. Rebecca raised her weapon. "He said enough." Richard smirked. "Then I guess I didn't hide it well enough. Shame." Donovan flanked to the left, securing the room. There were shelves filled with boxes, old VHS tapes, notebooks, and labeled files. Rebecca's eyes scanned the titles. Danny Year 1, Elaine Confession, Fire Prep. She felt sick. "You documented it all?" Richard shrugged. "People forget, but I don't. And I knew one day someone like you would come knocking." "You took a child," Rebecca said, stepping closer. "You burned a house down. You faked their deaths. Why?" For the first time, something flickered in Richard's expression. Disgust, or maybe pride. Because Brian Whitaker was a traitor. He was going to expose things. He and Elaine both. They thought the system would protect them. It wouldn't. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly. "So you silenced them?" Richard laughed bitterly. "Elaine made a deal. She helped. She gave me the boy. Said she couldn't run anymore. I gave her a new life. New name. But Brian, he wouldn't break. So I broke him." Donovan reached for one of the boxes. "You have records of all of this. Why keep them?" Richard turned slowly, voice low. "Because someday, I'd want people to know I was right." His hand moved toward something on the shelf. Rebecca stepped forward. "Don't." But he didn't stop. In one quick motion, he grabbed a metal switch hidden behind a book. The ground shook slightly. Somewhere above them, Max barked wildly. Donovan lunged at Richard, slamming him against the wall. Rebecca spun toward the stairwell, but a heavy metal door had dropped from the ceiling, sealing them in. The basement wasn't just a hideout, it was a trap. Trapped underground with a man who knew how to erase people, and had almost done it perfectly. The air in the basement was thick with dust and dread. Rebecca paced near the sealed stairwell, her radio hissing with static. No signal. Above them, Max barked frantically, claws scraping the trapdoor. Donovan had Richard pinned to the wall, but the older man remained eerily calm, like everything was going according to plan. "You buried yourself," Richard said, smiling, "just like the others." Rebecca turned to the shelf of labeled boxes. She pulled one marked Elaine Confession and opened it. Inside was an old cassette recorder and a single tape. She slipped the cassette in, hit play, and the voice of a woman crackled to life. "This is Elaine Whitaker. If you're hearing this, I failed. I wanted to run. I wanted to protect my son. But I knew they'd find us." Her voice was trembling but clear. Rebecca and Donovan exchanged a look. Elaine continued, "Brian tried to expose the cover-up involving the department's informant program. He said too many good people were being used and discarded. He was warned to stop. Then Richard came. He was never just a neighbor. He was the cleaner." The tape clicked, then restarted. Donovan slammed his fist on the shelf. "She tried to blow the whistle. That's why they were targeted. And this bastard helped silence her." Richard chuckled. "She wasn't innocent. She made a deal. She wanted out. She gave me the boy and walked away. She was tired of hiding." Rebecca snapped. "And you let everyone think they were dead? You burned their home, destroyed their lives." He stared at her. "They were already destroyed. I just did the paperwork." Rebecca turned to the boxes again. "We take this evidence and we bring it all back. Everything you tried to bury, your tapes, your files, your lies, they'll see the light." But Richard tilted his head. "Only if you get out of here alive." He looked toward a metal box in the corner, time charges. Crude, homemade, but effective enough. Donovan pushed him harder against the wall. "Tell me how to disable it. Now." Suddenly, from above, they heard scraping metal on metal. Max had somehow wedged his jaws into the edge of the trapdoor, pulling at it with desperate strength. Light spilled through the crack. Reinforcements had arrived. A voice echoed from above. "Rebecca, we're here." It was Linda Parker, and she wasn't alone. For the first time, Richard's expression shifted, from smug control to doubt. The noose was tightening. His lies were surfacing. And with Elaine's recorded words now in Rebecca's hands, there would be no hiding the truth any longer. The trapdoor gave way with a loud crack as responders above pried it open, flooding the basement with light and noise. Max lunged forward first, barking with relief as he jumped down and ran straight to Rebecca, tail thrashing wildly. Behind him came Linda Parker, 2 sheriff's deputies, and a medic. "We tracked your signal," she said, breathless. "And Max wouldn't stop barking until we followed." Richard Hale was finally in handcuffs. For the first time, he looked old, no longer the calculating predator, but a man stripped of power. As he was led upstairs, he turned once to Rebecca and said, "You're too late, you know? She's gone. You'll never find her." But his voice lacked conviction. He knew it was over. Outside, Danny stood near the SUV, bundled in a jacket too big for him. He looked up as Max approached and knelt down to hug the dog tightly. Rebecca crouched beside him. "Danny, it's okay now. He won't hurt you anymore." Danny didn't answer right away. Then, with surprising calm, he said, "He wasn't the only one. There was someone else. Someone who watched over me when Richard wasn't there." Rebecca's heart skipped. "Who, sweetheart?" Danny hesitated, then whispered, "Tommy. He said he was my brother." Donovan froze. Brian and Elaine had 1 child, not 2. Rebecca's eyes widened. No, they had 2. The file said Brian and Elaine had a teenage son who ran away years before the fire. He was never found. Just then, a deputy called over. "You'll want to see this." In a storage shed behind the cabin, They found a makeshift living space. Bed, blankets, food wrappers, and scribbled drawings on the walls. One showed a tall boy and a little boy holding hands. Another showed Max. On the back of one drawing, "Danny, protect him." Rebecca picked it up slowly. He was here, all this time, watching over Danny from the shadows. Donovan added, "Maybe he's the one who dropped him off at the airport. Maybe he couldn't protect him anymore." As they processed the scene, a young man stepped from the tree line. Skinny, hooded, eyes full of fear and guilt. He raised his hands. "Don't shoot. I'm not here to run. I just wanted to make sure he was safe." Rebecca stared in shock. It was him, older, bruised by years of hiding, but unmistakably Tommy Whitaker. Danny saw him and ran forward. "Tommy!" The boy wrapped his arms around his older brother, tears flooding both their faces. Tommy whispered, "I never left you. I just couldn't let him find you." 3 weeks later, the courthouse in Albany was packed with reporters, officers, and members of the community who had followed the case as it unfolded. The trial against Richard Hale had begun, and the evidence Rebecca and Donovan had uncovered was overwhelming. Tapes, photos, and the testimony of both Elaine Whitaker and her sons. For the first time in years, the truth had a voice. Elaine had come forward just days after Richard's arrest. She had been living under an assumed name, too afraid to speak. But when she learned Danny was safe, and that Tommy had reappeared, she agreed to testify. On the stand, her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "I chose silence out of fear. My husband tried to do the right thing, and paid with his life. But I won't stay quiet anymore." Outside the courthouse, Danny stood between Rebecca and Tommy, holding Max's leash. The dog sat proudly, now more than just a canine. He was part of their family. Tommy had been granted temporary custody, while Elaine's legal situation was reviewed. But one thing was certain: Danny would never be alone again. Rebecca crouched down to Danny's level. "You okay, buddy?" He nodded, looking up at her with a smile that didn't carry as much weight as before. It was lighter now. "You found me," he said softly. She smiled back. "No, Max found you. I just followed him." Max wagged his tail, nudging Danny's hand. Later that day, back at Rebecca's home, Tommy helped unpack boxes from a small U-Haul. The state had approved a new housing placement. Danny and Tommy would live together with support while they rebuilt their lives. Elaine, once cleared legally, would join them in time. For the first time in years, the Whitaker family had a chance to be whole again. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Rebecca stood on her porch with a cup of coffee. Donovan joined her, hands in his pockets. "You did good," he said. "So did Max." She glanced at the dog lying peacefully near Danny on the lawn. "He always knew where to go. I just had to trust him." Danny laughed in the background as Tommy chased him with a garden hose, both of them soaked and smiling. For a moment, everything was still. No sirens, no lies, just family damaged but healing. Rebecca exhaled, the weight finally lifting from her shoulders. Some stories don't end with justice in a courtroom. They end in second chances, in forgiveness, and sometimes in the sound of a child laughing again, finally safe.